What I'm going to tell you is likely to make you a little uncomfortable. You see, as a physician, I often have to deliver a devastating diagnosis. Well, I have one of those diagnoses for all of us here today. Now, let me be blunt. I'm going to have to walk us through some pretty dark areas, but don't worry, don't leave. See, I'm not going to let us stay there. You see, it's my intention, it's my goal that this message over the next few minutes seduces you into a new way of thinking. A new way of looking at life's obstacles and challenges, like during this pandemic, times of social isolation, and endless Zoom meetings. I'm absolutely confident that this message has the power to change you, and I'm going to use medical science to make my case. Ready? All right, let's do part one of the diagnosis. Every day, every single one of us listens to a narrated story in our mind. Well, scientific evidence has now confirmed that that story is, by default, by nature, negative. And that story affects how we carry ourselves through the day and affects every one of our relationships. Look, trust me, I have firsthand experience with this. You see, when I was 13, my adolescence was forever wrecked by my father's untimely death. That one event triggered this domino effect of personal and family turmoil, resulting ultimately in my mother's repetitive attempts at suicide, some of which I had the undesired front row seat to witness. Those events left me with insecurities and self-doubts and feelings of abandonment and unworthiness. You see, my narrated story told me that I wasn't good enough, that I wasn't worthy of attention or affection or of being lived for. Now, looking back, I can name the three assailants that held me captive for so many years. They were depression, anxiety, and low self-esteem. Now, to be honest, that was my daily existence for over 20 years. Now, although I seemed to have everything okay and everything together on the outside, man, I was the life of the party. The truth is, on the inside, I was completely broken. Now, you know mine's not an isolated story. In May of 2020, a medical report was released saying that 1 in 4 Americans met the clinical criteria for severe mental distress or illness as a response to the pandemic. That number represents a 700% increase from 2018. And by the way, this time last year, in mid-March of 2020, the use of antidepressant medications, anti-anxiety medications, and insomnia medications all rose over 30%. By the way, no one is immune. In November of 2020, a medical crisis alert was raised, calling attention to the unacceptably high rate of suicide among pregnant or recently postpartum women. And even in medicine, healthcare professionals are hurting and they're emotionally spent. Physician burnout has been called a national crisis. So, what's the diagnosis? Well, I think it's pretty easy, don't you? I mean, our mental health, it's on the ropes. Now, before I go any further, I have to be very clear. Look, there are real conditions like psychoses, schizophrenia, manic depressive disorder, and a list of others that require medication. But medication use alone for our daily battles with stress, anxiety, low self-esteem, anxiety and depression is only fixing half the battle if we don't change that narrative that we're playing in our mind. Here's why this issue is so important. You see, neuropsychologists have in fact confirmed that we do have a default thought pathway, and the truth is, it really is negative. Neuropsychologists have labeled this the brain's negativity bias, and it's running wild. Now, this was first thought to be a self-protective and adaptive mechanism, but it's out of control. Now, it's not that hard for us to figure out, right? I mean, think about it. Is it easier for you to be positive or negative throughout the day? Well, let's put this to the test. Let's say you receive an email from your professor or your teacher, or make it more personal, from your boyfriend or girlfriend or husband and wife. And it says, we really need to talk today. Where does your brain first go? If you're honest, and you're like most of us, it probably goes someplace dark, because we are programmed for negativity. I love what Mark Twain said. Twain wrote, "Look, I've been through some terrible things in my life, some of which actually happened." You see, our brains are like Velcro to negative experiences and Teflon to positive ones. Well, why is that? Well, neurochemical studies have now given us an answer. It seems that negative connections produce more neural connections in our brain and are more quickly converted into long-term memory compared to positive ones. Now, this also explains why it's so easy for us in general to replay negative stories over and over again in our mind, but we don't tend to do that as much for positive ones. That process is called mental rumination. But there is good news. See, there is a remedy for breaking this negativity bias. And this remedy doesn't even require a trip to the pharmacy. You see, this remedy, this prescription starts and ends with our mindset. Mindset, I truly believe, is a form of mind medicine, and we need the right dose of it every single day. You see, this is the one thing that changed everything for me. As a physician and as a scientist, I approached my own search for a remedy like I was doing a dissertation. I searched for recent data and I compared it to historical texts. And there was that one theme that kept repeating itself over and over again, despite different decades, actually across different centuries of publication, from psychology, psychiatry, expert opinions in mental health, and even chronic disease journals. This one issue of mindset kept showing up. Now, I know this concept of mindset is pretty popular and it gets thrown around a lot in pop culture, but I want to show you this in a new way. See, I don't want to just approach it from its proven historical origins. I want to show you how important mindset actually is, not just to our emotional and our mental well-being, but to our physical health as well. Listen, this is why we've got to get this right now. You see, each one of our lives comes down to a simple dash. That dash represents the number of years from our birth date to our final date. According to the CDC, as of December of 2020, the average life expectancy for us as Americans is just 77.7 years on average. Now take away the first 10 years for childhood growth and development, the next 5 years for expected teenage angst, and the last 10 years for age-related reduction in function and natural disease. You know what that leaves? Just 52 years in the middle. 52 hopefully high productive, high functional, impactful years, but how we choose to spend those depends entirely on how we view events around us, how we interpret things through our mind's eye, and that perception is all based on our mindset. Look, I've had a unique opportunity as an OBGYN physician. I've seen the bipolar ends of life. I've had a unique opportunity, and really it's an honor, to usher in new life into this world. And at the same time, I've held patients' hands as they have left it. I've seen patients with devastating medical conditions overcome improbable odds, while others with less severe diagnoses seem to succumb to fear, defeat, and death. So what's the difference in those two groups? Well, outside of biological reasons, medical science has now confirmed that the key lies in their mindset and in their will to overcome. Here's what I have seen in my own life, in my medical practice, and here's what I know to be true. It's been written about in historical texts. It's very easy. We have the power to choose whether this expedition, this odyssey that we call life, will lead us down into despair or depression, or significance and success. But don't take my word for it. I love what the father of American psychology, William James, wrote in the 19th century. James said, "The greatest discovery of my generation is that an individual can alter their entire destiny just by altering their attitude of thought." Even though that was written over 100 years ago and still valid today, we seem to have forgotten that basic concept. All right, now remember I told you I was going to use medical science to make my case. All right, well, get ready, because I'm going to show you some things that are kind of wild. See, we've always understood that our emotions affect how we feel physically. That makes sense, right? Depression feels like fatigue or a chronic headache or chronic pelvic pain or insomnia. Anxiety can present like palpitations or racing heartbeat or sweaty palms and shortness of breath. We get that. But there's a growing body of medical literature that suggests that our emotional state of health has big implications for our long-term physical health as well. In order to make this case, I want to introduce you to 3 key players that are responsible for our brain's biology. They are cortisol, dopamine, and serotonin. You see, cortisol by itself is a good thing. Cortisol is a natural hormone responsible in our body, and it takes care of us for our fight or flight response. So when we have an external threat, our cortisol level rises to keep us out of harm's way. But what neurochemical studies have now confirmed is when we have these self-inflicted battles within our own thought of fear, denial, low self-esteem, our body can't distinguish that thought life threat from a physical threat, and so our body's cortisol levels rise and stay elevated perpetually. High cortisol levels in the brain wreak havoc on the brain's function. It seems that persistent elevated cortisol levels seems to foster or endorse or push us more into more addictive style negative thinking. And when our cortisol levels rise in the brain and stay high, our dopamine and serotonin levels drop. Now look, trust me, you don't want low dopamine and serotonin levels, okay? Those are our happy hormones. I mean, dopamine, for example, is our reward-seeking hormone. We need those. So by our own self-inflicted mental states and rising our cortisol level, we're pushing ourselves further down into this dark spiral of despair and depression. Cortisol in the body also wreaks havoc as well. You see, cortisol in the body leads to system-wide inflammation, and that leads to free radical formation. Those two items are independent contributors to chronic disease, like heart disease, stroke, the metabolic syndrome, obesity, certain cancers, and even dementia. Now, talking about dementia, here's a good place for us to kind of stop a little bit, and I know it's your favorite, so we're going to review a little bit of neuroanatomy. Now, it's going to be very brief. Now, even though there's a lot of areas in the brain responsible for how we process stress, fear, anxiety, depression, I want to focus on just 3 key areas here. And we're going to start with a little almond-shaped structure deep in the center of our brain called the amygdala. See, the amygdala is our emotional control center, and it functions like a type of radar. It's one of the first things that gets activated when we either have a thought or see an external stimulus. From there, that message goes to the hippocampus for long-term storage as a memory, and then it gets kicked over to the front of our brain called the neocortex, or the prefrontal cortex. Listen, here's what neuroimaging studies have now confirmed. After long exposures of anxiety, fear, or depression, those individuals can actually grow the size of their amygdala and reduce the size of their prefrontal cortex. Now, the prefrontal cortex is responsible for our rational thought. It's our higher critical thinking center. So we can actually, it looks like, change our brain's not just neurochemistry, but anatomy to be further driven by emotion instead of rational thought. This also helps to explain why people that are negative kind of tend to stay negative. You know somebody like that? It may be hardwired into their brain. Now, that's important in and of itself. But wait, there's more. You see, in December of 2020, out of the Journal of the American Medical Association, a very well-respected journal, they actually found just how important this issue of mindset and negativity bias actually is. This is going to get you. See, these researchers followed pregnant women, self-identified as high emotional stress, fear, anxiety, or just depressed. And this was validated on scale. They then had their babies undergo functional MRI scans, and those babies actually had altered neurodevelopment, just like the patterns of adults that we found. Did y'all get that? So the authors concluded that maternal psychological distress during pregnancy can actually lead to neuropsychiatric defects in children. We are passing this on to children not even born. Now, before I come to the end of our time together, I have to share with you the most important, the most powerful form of mind medicine that I've found yet. And hopefully it's going to help you see life in a different way. And it comes in the form of 2 words, Memento Mori. Now, before I give you the English translation of this Latin phrase, I have to put it into context, because without it, the translation is kind of dark. In order to understand where this comes from, we have to go back to ancient Rome, in a time when Rome was the seat of power and civilization. Now, after a Roman conquest, it was tradition for the conquering Roman general to be paraded through the streets of Rome to the praise and the adoration of the people in a horse-drawn chariot. Now, it was the job of a lonely peasant servant to stand behind the general and whisper repetitively into his ear, in the middle of all the praise and celebration, Memento Mori, Memento Mori. Translated in English, that means, remember, you're only human, and one day you must die. Well, what a bummer that. Who in the world is going to say that in the middle of a parade and a celebration? But please understand the intent of that. See, that wasn't to depress the victor or somehow subtract or detract from the moment of the celebration. No. It was just the opposite. See, it was a reminder, an encouragement to tell the general to live that moment 100% to the full, knowing that everything is fleeting. It was a reminder to listen to every sound, appreciate every odor, feel every touch, and to live 100% maximum in that celebration. It was a reminder that just like past hurts and disappointments don't last forever, neither do our joys and successes. You see, if we really understood this principle of mind medicine, how would it affect how we live today? I've had to learn this for myself in my personal life. I mean, if we knew that our time was fleeting and we're just not here for all that long, which arguments would you just walk away from because they seem petty in light of the bigger picture? And at the same time, which relationships would you go back and mend because they're worth fighting for? Which jobs will we just leave in search of greater adventures? And lastly, how much easier if we understood this concept of memento mori and understood our mindset? How much easier would it be to turn the page on past hurts and desires and failed expectations, and so that we can write our next chapter in our book? Now, as I come to the end of our time together, I do have to leave you with an important disclosure, because every prescription has a disclosure, right? Well, here it is. Please understand that what I'm offering you, this prescription for mind medicine of viewing life differently, because we're only here for a short amount of time, and this concept of a memento mori, please understand, this is not a panacea or a cure-all for life's troubles. No, no, no. Life is really hard. You're going to have loss. You're going to have disappointment. Someone's going to hurt you. However, even though this prescription will not guarantee you a safe journey or a smooth road as you go down the road of life, I do promise you, I almost guarantee you that it will help you to better enjoy the ride. Memento Mori. Thank you.